A country's approach to transportation is a pretty clear indicator of its principles. Does the money go to public transport or to the private sort? President Obama's stimulus bill allocates $17 billion for public transportation, but highways get billions more. Meanwhile, fares are rising and services are shrinking. In St. Louis, Missouri this week, 24 bus routes were eliminated or shortened, effective right now. In New York City, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority wants to increase the subway fare to over $100 a month. And even in Congress's hometown, Washington, D.C., the Metro's proposing bus cuts. As the budget battle shapes up in Congress, the topic of public transport is going to be hot. It's been decades since the last major federal investment. If not now, then when? Affordable public transport deserves a place at the center of any stimulus package, say advocates, as you'll hear. We're joined by Jean Russianoff, staff attorney for NYPIRGs' Straphangers campaign, Lindsey Lusher Shute, director of environmental campaigns for Transportation Alternatives, also in New York, David Goldberg, communications director for Transportation for America, and Francisca Porchas, lead organizer of the Clean Air, Clean Lungs, Clean Buses campaign with the Bus Riders Union in Los Angeles. Let's start with you, Jean. What are people facing here in New York? What are you facing? What am I facing?
Well, it's definitely the worst service cuts in over 40 years that our agency, the MTA, has been around, talking about eliminating 5 subway lines, either entirely or in major part, more than 20 bus routes, and then hundreds of people who work at booths in the station that keep the system safe and secure. And to couple it all, you're going to be asked to pay a whole lot more for a whole lot less. A 30-day pass on our system is going to cost $103 if these fare hikes go through. That's a number I associate more with the Broadway Theater than with getting around town.
David, to you, I mean, this is coming in a time when we're hearing from Washington that there's a new commitment to public services and to public investment. Where is it?
Well, the problem here is that there's been a long-standing fight over transit and how much support to give it at the national level. And at the moment, we're stuck in something of a time warp. We've got this horrible economic situation, which is depressing revenues absolutely all over the country. Meanwhile, we have people who are barely hanging on to jobs, who need a way to get to those jobs, and they're faced with the prospect of losing the bus route, losing the ability to pay for their transportation to work. And they're really caught in a serious bind. That we tried the Transportation for America campaign during the stimulus debate to make the argument that a lot of what we were talking about with the stimulus was preserving essential services so that the economy could continue to function, so that the people who are working at the lower ends of the economy could keep pumping money into the economy. And transit was a big part of that. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get emergency service preservation money in the stimulus, but there are a couple different avenues to try now, and we hope Congress will pick up on that.
To give us a clearer sense of the picture on the West Coast, Francisca, to you, L.A. is your classic big, sprawling city with a lot of people, including a lot of working people, trying to get to work. How do they do it? How do people get from home to work in Los Angeles mostly?
Bus. Bus is the backbone of the entire system, and we right now only have about 2,400 buses, whereas New York and its boroughs has about 5,000, and we're a 4,000 square mile county. If we're talking about people and needing money back into people's pockets, putting money into people's pockets, we're talking about 500,000 bus riders that make $12,000 a year. So for us, the stimulus talk is really about what's happening here as well locally, and in terms of how is that money making down its way into people's actual services. MTA right now has $800 million coming from the stimulus, of which most of it is going to be going to highways and rail expansion. And so for us, the conversation is, how does that free up all the other money that they already had secured for highways and capital expansion of rail in order to actually put bus service back into the streets, into lower fares. There's been 2 fare increases in the last 4 years here in Los Angeles where people are really struggling. We have a very low income to non-working base of people of color, mostly Black, Latino, and Asian, that make a cross-county trip all the way from East Los Angeles to the San Fernando Valley, 2, 3, 4 hours sometimes commutes, and so we desperately and direly need more bus service on the streets.
And that's what the people we're looking at here are clearly calling for. What's your response to the highway part of this plan, Lindsey, as an environmental specialist?
Absolutely. Highways and I've been disturbed to read how much state DOTs with the stimulus plan are putting into the continuation of highway infrastructure, which is kind of an outdated concept in reality.
The Department of Transportation.
Exactly. Continuing to build more and more highway capacity just exacerbates sprawl. And in addition to the fact that it creates pollution hotspots.
But don't we say that we need repaired highways and new highways? Don't we hear all the time that there's a problem with our infrastructure, and that's part of it?
Sure, maintaining highways is one thing, but building new highways to exacerbate sprawl is a very different thing.
Gene, you want to give
the situation in New York is very similar to Los Angeles. Of course, none of the money can be spent on operations, and we're losing hundreds of millions of dollars of service. And
when you say none of the money can be spent on operations, you mean the stimulus money?
None of the stimulus money.
Because it has to go to new initiatives, new projects?
It has to go to capital projects, and even there, the vast majority, we're going to get about $1.3 billion in stimulus money in New York. The large majority of it are going for new projects, for new projects, and the smaller amount for the things that are the bread and butter of the system, like fixing track and signals, buying new subway cars or buses, or rehabilitating stations. So
you mean even if the city were to get the full amount of the stimulus that it's hoping for, it wouldn't stop the fare hike?
It will have nothing to do with the fare hike. If the fare hike is pushed back, it'll be because riders have been able to convince state legislators in our capital, in Albany, that transit is worth investing in for the city's economic and environmental future.
Well, make that case for us, will you, David? What's the relationship between public transportation and stimulating the economy?
Well, public transportation is a critical piece of the economy. If people can't get to work, obviously they can't do their jobs. If suddenly we had all these people pour out into the highways wouldn't work, and those people couldn't get to their jobs. So it's absolutely critical that we keep the public transportation operating. And the difficult part is that it's people often who are making some of the toughest commutes now. We're talking about taking away bus routes and potentially making commutes even longer if people can get to work. So it's really an economic problem, and it's a widespread problem. It's not just L.A. and New York. There's 85 plus jurisdictions around the country that are looking at serious cuts right now. Not all of them as serious as St. Louis, not even as serious necessarily as the Metro. But the sad part is that we just hit a 52-year high in transit ridership across the country. The highest, by the way, since the 1956 Highway Act was passed, when we started diverting money mostly to build the interstates, which was a worthy enough project, but we've done that project. As Gene was alluding to, we really need to start thinking about how we shift some resources to the transit agencies that are becoming increasingly important in every metro region in the country.
I was in Seattle this last weekend for Greenfest, and I met a woman who described taking 2 different buses to get to the job interview that she was going for. And that job interview was as a hot dog seller at a Home Depot. And when you try to do the math of how much it's going to cost her in transportation versus how much she's likely to earn, you see where this economy is at. You also see how devastating it would be if she got the job and the bus services were cut.